Hello and welcome to Mr. Walker's APES. Uh, Today we're just going to give you a brief introduction to what this whole course is really about. So a lot of people think that environmental science means or is equivalent to ecology, and that's not the case at all. Ecology is about the study of interactions between species, and environmental science focuses on one species, the humans, and our interaction with the environment. How do humans affect the environment? Okay, so that's going to be our focus throughout this entire course. And so today I'm just going to introduce you to a few key words and talk about how humans affect the environment and why. Okay, so our first thing, always have some sort of outcome for this, some things you should get out of this lecture. So I want you to be able to identify what natural capital is and understand why it's necessary for life. I think once you understand what natural capital is, it'll be quite obvious why it's necessary for life. But that's a vocabulary word you're going to be seeing quite a bit in this course, and I want you to really know what it means. I want you to be able to explain, and by the end of the course, understand the underlying causes for today's environmental problems. And finally, we will summarize why these things that humans do are causing environmental degradation. And this may seem quite obvious to you at this point, but we're going to get really in depth with this stuff. Okay, so the first question that we need to answer is this one: what is the environment? I mean, if we're trying to study how humans affect the environment, then we need to know what the environment is, so we understand what we're trying to study. And maybe you've never really tried to define the environment, but I define it as everything that affects any unique living organism. Well, that's quite a lot, isn't it? That's everything on Earth, right? So that's a lot to study. So here are some things that we're going to really focus on, and I think this covers a lot. These are our natural resources. These are the things that keep organisms alive, and without them, there would be no life. Okay? We must have air. We must have an atmosphere. There must be water, as far as we know, for life to exist. There must be some type of medium to live on, so soil. There must be energy. Okay? If there's no energy, there's no life. Where do you think most of our energy comes from? All right. So think about that. And then, of course, minerals. These could be anything from vitamins to literally minerals. Okay, calcium and iron and things that all living organisms of some type need some type of mineral. And they just get them in different ways, usually through what they eat. Okay? So, those things here, these natural resources, once they become used, they become capital. Alright? So usually you hear of capital in the terms of economics. You hear of, right now we've got this giant campaign going on where Mitt Romney used to run a company called Bain Capital. Alright? He would buy companies and then resell them or whatever, and so he was creating capital, creating money by buying and selling businesses. So you've got that term. Well, that's kind of what this is. Money is a resource, and then once you spend it, then it becomes capital. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here with natural resources. It's a resource until we use it, then it becomes capital. So natural capital has a way of sustaining itself. The stuff we use will be self-sustaining until we mess with it. All right? Air circulates, we know this. Water cycles, we're going to study all these things really in depth. We're going to study how air circulates in the atmosphere. We're going to study how water cycles through the earth. We're going to study how soil builds up. We're going to study how nutrients, especially nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, cycle. And we're going to learn about some non-renewable resources, things like coal, things like oil. Those are fossil fuels. And we're talking about, well, they don't really cycle, okay? They exist, and we use them, and then they're gone, okay? They might eventually return, but it's going to take many, many thousands of years, and that's not something that we can exactly wait around for, is it? So, these processes, these cycles, we call them ecological services. All right. So, Earth provides ecological services completely for free that recycle natural capital so that we can continue to use them. Makes sense, okay? Simple enough, all right? And these are probably all things that you learned about throughout your school career, and things that seem pretty intuitive, right? Okay, water, it rains, then it goes into the ground, some evaporates, it rains again, all right, that sort of thing. It's recycling so that we can continue to have water to drink, to survive, and there you go. All right, so that sort of stuff. This class will go really in depth on, how do these happen? And once you understand how they happen, you can start thinking of ways that humans affect them. So, again, very intuitive. These ecological services, the cycling of air, water, soil, minerals, etc., are essential for life of all kinds. Anything from the smallest bacterium to the biggest mammal requires these cycles. So, some examples. Gotta have clean air to breathe. Gotta have trees for shelter, for building stuff. Gotta have, food for predators to eat. So, all these other sorts of things. Very important. So humans have these same basic needs. We are animals at the most basic level. So we must have food, we must have shelter, we must have water. Okay, money. Money doesn't necessarily have to be money in the sense that we think of it. You need to have a type of capital. You need to have, there's that word again. You need to have something that you can spend, because humans are social creatures. So even if you're living in the Amazon jungle, they don't have, obviously, US dollars or even pesos or, any sort of government-backed money. But, they might have something that they're willing to trade. Handmade jewelry, for instance, that would work as a type of money, things like that. Obviously, in the United States, we use money to buy all sorts of things. We are a first world nation, or a developed nation is the new term, a developed nation. And we, of course, have all sorts of things. But we still need food, shelter, and water of some type. All right. So where are we going to get all these things from? Natural capital. Money even comes from, it's our money is a mix of cotton and paper. Gotta have the plants. No plants, no money. No minerals for those plants, no plants, no money. Okay, it's all chained together. So what happens when we start screwing with things? What happens when we disrupt natural cycles? Well, we get pollution. Okay, the pollution that humans create, a lot of it is relatively natural. Okay, if you burn some wood in your home to keep warm in the winter, okay, that's no different than a forest fire. The difference is that forest fires might only happen over a couple thousand acres once every couple decades, whereas we're burning millions of acres every year. And that, of course, is putting more of the byproducts of burning wood into the air than the natural process is used to, and it can't keep up. So we come up with pollution. Even if it's a natural pollutant, if it's more than what should be there, thus creating a harm, it's pollution. Okay. So, yeah, of all these things, lots of problems, Biodiversity is something we're going to talk about a lot. That's, how many types of species are in a given area. And if you lose some of those species, your biodiversity decreases. Well, there's problems with that. Okay, it might have been a food source for another species, so that species is going to begin looking for something else. If you take away all the bison from the Midwest, well, now the wolves don't have anything to eat, so they're going to start turning towards things that are there, like sheep. Okay, well, now farmers are getting angry, so they're killing wolves, and it's this giant struggle, and it usually leads to species extinction. So, excessive amounts of waste. Look at all the landfills that we have. All the things that are in landfills came from natural capital. All right, the Earth provided all that stuff. We're not mining asteroids yet. So, well, now we've got landfills all over the United States filling up, and we're building more. The Earth isn't able to recycle that waste quickly enough. And of course, when we look at soil, we're going to be looking at things like erosion, and especially fertility loss. There's only so much soil on this planet. It also takes a very long time to create soil. It's about 400 years to create 1 inch of soil. So, if we're losing a foot of it every time it rains because we're not properly keeping our soil from eroding, your farm's not going to last very long. If you are overplanting certain types of crops, you're not practicing good agricultural techniques like crop rotation, like proper fertilization techniques, then you're going to eventually deplete the soil of its nutrients, and you won't be able to grow anything. And finally, groundwater depletion. Okay, a lot of places in the world rely on groundwater for their freshwater drinking source because they don't have a nearby river or stream to go to. When you have population growth explode and you're using groundwater faster than it can be replaced, you're going to run out of groundwater. And so why does it all matter? Well, I think that you could think of lots of reasons as why this matters. If you don't have any food, you're going to starve. If you don't have any air to breathe, you're going to get cancer and die. Asthma, is on the rise in the United States. It's a major problem for young people today. Well, why do you think it's so much worse today than it was 50 years ago? What's changed over the last 50 years in the United States? Primarily growth, pollution. Okay, air pollution is the biggest thing. The chemicals that we put into the air, of course, also. In 1950, a lot of things were still relatively natural. Okay, most things were still made from a local farm, food, etc. You didn't have as many cars, all that sort of stuff. Plastics were not as existent, all that sort of stuff. So you've got lots of problems. Water pollution is going to lead to a loss of food source, especially in this area. It's a big deal. Okay, if the Chesapeake Bay becomes too polluted, then they're not going to let us eat crabs and things like that out of the Chesapeake Bay. Well, that's a big source of income for a lot of people in this area. So water pollution is huge. Biodiversity depletion, yeah, big deal. Okay, could be introducing invasive species, could be removing an essential keystone species. Lots of things. So I threw in a couple of vocabulary words there. We're going to learn about what a keystone species is and what a invasive species is. And of course, excessive waste. Less land because we've got to put landfills there. Pollution of water resources. If you're not properly disposing of the things that you create as waste, you could have water pollution. Landfills today are usually lined to prevent that. We'll learn about how landfills are made so that you understand what happens to the stuff you throw in the trash can every day. So, underlying causes. These are things that, are going to be strung throughout the course. They're going to be woven into every single unit, just because they are underlying causes for degradation of natural capital. So, First thing, population growth. Population growth leads to wasteful resource use, which we call affluenza. It's the unsustainable addiction to overconsumption of materialization in the U.S. and other developed nations. In other words, we're in a materialistic world. Okay, Madonna's song, Material Girl, it's where we're at. You know, you've got to have the latest, greatest computer, smartphone, TV, whatever. Even if your old one works perfectly fine, you're always getting new stuff. Well, what happens to the old stuff? Okay, it gets thrown away. Clothes, every season, there's some new great fashion. Well, what was wrong with the old fashion? It covered you, you weren't nude. All right? So, we've got this materialism problem. And, of course, poverty. Believe it or not, the more impoverished you are, the less environmentally friendly you tend to be. Now, that may not make sense, because the richer you are, the more things you tend to have, and the more electricity you're going to use because you have a bigger home and all that sort of stuff. Well, that's true, but also if you are wealthier, you tend to be more educated, and you tend to be able to also afford the more economically or the more environmentally sustainable option, like, you know, solar panels, like geothermal heat, like wind-powered electricity, and those sorts of things. And you also tend to be better educated so that you can know that those things exist, whereas if you are impoverished, you may not even know it exists, or even if you do, you're struggling to survive day to day, so you don't care. Ecological ignorance. All right, this is what I was just talking about. This whole, you know, if you're not well educated, then you may not know it exists. So, this course will hope to solve some of those things. You know, what are the cycles? How do they really work? What is global warming and global climate change, and why do scientists really think that they exist? Why do most scientists think that they exist, and what are the studies that show that? You know, what's the Green Revolution, and how has that changed our way of life over the last 60 years? Okay, all these things. And then, of course, the economic conditions, all right? If we don't account for the environmental cost in the cost of the product, then the product will be undervalued. So take that in for a second. Rewind the tape if you need to. I'll say it again. The environmental costs are not included in the product costs, which means that the product is undervalued. So, for example, if I'm making a dish detergent, okay, just making the dish detergent is going to burn fossil fuels, which have a cost on the environment. That's a resource we cannot get back anymore. Okay. Typically, that cost is passed on to the consumer, so that is environmental accounting. However, once I begin to use that dish detergent and it goes down the drain and pollutes the water, that is not included. The cleanup cost of cleaning up the river, because I used the dish detergent and it went down my drain and into the river, and the cost to clean it up, that's not accounted for in the cost of the product. And if it was, people would be less likely to buy a product that is more environmentally contaminating, because it would just simply cost more. So think about that. Think about other ways that you can do that. All right. If you need to pause the video, please do. So in summary, the Earth provides natural resources and services, which together, natural capital. So once we begin to use these things, so the air you breathe, until you breathe it in, it is just a resource. Once you breathe it in, it becomes capital, because now you're utilizing it for something, which would be surviving. And these cycles maintain themselves when left alone. Humans and other organisms rely on these things to survive. Humans, more than any other species, exploit natural capital. Okay, all species exploit it to some extent to survive. Unfortunately, humans go well beyond. We over-exploit. We go to the point of there will be no more. That's how far we exploit it. And so we are disrupting these cycles, which means the Earth cannot maintain itself, which means that human quality of life is diminished, and other organisms die. They suffer as a result of our quality of life. Now, well, eventually, you can follow that through. What happens when all other species die? What's the ultimate conclusion here if humans do not change? So, we have to live sustainably. Okay, that means that we need to live off of the natural capital that can be replenished by Earth cycles naturally. We need to not deplete them. We need to live at a level at which the resources are replenished at the same rate that we use them. That's what it means to be sustainable. So here's a question to think about. Is the current rate of natural capital use sustainable? Why or why not? Give examples. Think about everything. So at the end of this show, I have a quick review quiz. All right, here are 5 questions to think about. If you are unable to answer at least 4 out of 5 of these, then I would rewatch this video and try and get the answers, okay? So what is natural capital? Natural capital naturally replenishes itself. True or false? Just a true or false question. List 3 ways humans disrupt natural cycles. So you have to think about that one. I did not necessarily list 3 specific things, but if you understand what a natural cycle is, then you should be able to give 3 ways that we disrupt them from your everyday experiences. What are the consequences of disrupting natural cycles for humans or for animals, either one? And why do we exploit natural capital? Give 2 reasons. So why do we use the natural resources? All right, so that's it for today. I hope that you learned something, and I'll see you next time.